is the first Shmuz since the fire that we had Shabbos. So I think this to start with a thanks to the Rebbeinu Shalom that nobody got hurt. We have to keep reminding ourselves that we had a tremendous chesed. Could have been Chalila. Now it's just with financial things, this bill, that bill, whatever it is. But Baruch Hashem, everyone got out safely. And about Birchas HaGoimel, I checked with the Rav. He said that since it wasn't that dangerous, the actually getting out of the fire was just the fire was there, but it wasn't so. So he said that Rav Ayah said they don't have to bench Goimel.
Well,
I know one of our, at least one of our Talmidim that was in the fire was out in a different shul this past Monday, and he told the Rav said he should bench Goimel, so he did bench Goimel, at least one of them. But anyway,
the guy was even. You told me even the guys on that side that were by the fire. You said you have to bench guard.
That's what the mice that they got out wasn't like they, they weren't. It wasn't like hard to get out of it.
Oh, I mean, only it's hard to get out.
It wasn't like
they wouldn't have woken up.
They weren't trapped, or then somebody, whatever it was like fire broke out, and they. We'll see. So I wanted to first speak a little bit about the halachas, so just a few things about it.
Why not?
Just to feel the Goimel, after the idea of instead of the bracha, then maybe we'll have time. We'll still be more on the parsha or something. We'll see. But it's in the Simmeration test. It says that Bar Tzrichim L'Hoidus. The Gemara it says this poor people have to thank Hashem. In the old days, in the good old days, when they had Beis Mikdash, they brought a carbon taida. But nowadays, the Hoidus means to thank Hashem with the bracha of Agayim. One is if someone traveled through the Yam successfully, or through the Midbar. So when he gets to a civilized place, he makes a bracha. So that's one category. Then there's someone who was sick and got healed, or someone who was actually there's kinds of two: the traveling through the Yam, Midbar, and then the Chayla, and then someone that was in prison. And it gives us a way to remember it. It's from the word Chaim. Chaim, the Ches stands for Chavush, means he was locked up in jail, and Yud is Yisuim, I guess that's the sickness. Yam is the traveling through the Yam, and Midbar, traveling through the Midbar. The Chaim is remember the way the four cases. What bracha do we say? We say He gives those who don't deserve it. Chayav means they don't deserve tayvos. So we recognize we don't deserve the taiva, but we thank Hashem who gives us the taiva. That's how the Mishabur brings here. What does it mean, l'chayavim? Pirish afilu oisum shehem chayavim. Even those people that don't deserve, they're chayiv. Im kol zeh, nevertheless, goyim lehem taiva. Hashem does taivas. So the gamani, so the person has to feel myself. Aval pisha eini k'hogan, I don't deserve it. Im kol zeh g'malani k'hol taiv. Hashem helped me in one of these four cases. So that's why we have to feel that even if we didn't deserve it, Hashem saved us. Now, I'm going to jump a little bit because there's a machlekes here at the end of the siman. Let's talk about someone who traveled. We said he traveled through the Yam, or he traveled through a Midbar. So it says here in Shif Zayin, it says that there's a machlekes between Ashkenaz and Sfard. The Mechaber himself, usually we have the Mechaber says the opinion of Sfard, and the Ramah says the opinion of Ashkenaz. Here the Mechaber himself brings Ashkenaz and Sfard. It's an unusual thing. He says, but Ashkenaz, he starts off, and Sarfas, Ashkenaz is Germany, I think officially, that's the name of the country, and Sarfas in France, Ein mevarchin sheholchem me'ir le'ir. If you didn't travel through a desert, you just traveled from one city to the next city, they would not say, it wouldn't say Birchas HaGoyim, it wouldn't say Bench Goyim, we call it. Why? Shleichivu el holchem midbaris. They only said if you go through Midbar, because then there's wild animals, there's gangsters in the Midbar, but you're just traveling from one city to the next. You don't have to bench Goyim. But with Sfarad, when it's Sfarad, Nahagim Levarach, anytime they travel from one city to the next city, they made a Birchas HaGoyim. Not talking about Tfilas HaDerech now, we're talking about benching Goyim. They should call Hadrochim Becheskas Sakana. Traveling is always, there's a danger in traveling. And anytime they travel, just like you say Tfilas HaDerech, they would bench Goyim. When they arrive safely, they bench Goyim. But he says it's only if it's a long distance, at least a parsec. If it's a short distance, then you don't, but unless it was a dangerous place. The similar machlekes in the next sif, what's considered someone who's sick? How sick does the person have to be that when he gets better, he benches gramel? So he says, so the Mechaber starts off, he says, his life was not endangered. It wasn't an internal wound. Where do you draw the line? If he had to be in bed. He had to be in bed because he was sick, and then he gets better, he had bench gramel, according to the first opinion, he says. Because he says, like, he was like, as if there was a din Torah about him. They were judging him, what should be with him. And then, but he says, the Ramah here says, Yesh Aimim, the Einim Avarach Rak al Choilish Yesh Bre Sakana. It's only if the person had a sakana, he went, or an internal wound into the sakana, he says. So it's a machlekes, and he says, V'chein agam Ashkenaz. And Ashkenaz, the minhag is only if he was very sick, that it was sakana. Then he benches grammar. So we have like a machlekes both by traveling and by sickness, how sick it has to be. Let's go back to the other case. He's in jail. Why was he in jail? Does it matter if he's in jail because he's accused of murder, and they might decide to kill him in those days with that, or is, let's say, just financially they put him in jail? So that's also machlekes. There's at the beginning of it, there's a baha'alotha about this that talks about if he's just in jail, even if he's in jail for a murder charge, some want to make a chilik that he has to bench gramel if he was in jail before they decided his sentence. So it was a sakana. They might decide to kill him. But let's say he says, in today's jails, that's the sentence, that's the punishment. He should be in jail. He says then when he gets out of jail, that wasn't a sakana. So maybe some say you don't make a bracha. Others say you do make a bracha. So there's a lot of just touching on some of the shilas that come up with benching gramel. He says, and then the last sif in the Simon says, these four are lav dafka, Mechaber says. Any other nest, for instance, a wall fell on him, or an ox attacked him, or he was in a lion, he says, who attacked him, or Ganovim came, he says. In those cases, a person has to bench a gomel. And others, Yesh Aimim, some we're talking about Beres a gomel because we had the fires. We're talking about whether you have to say a gomel against some halachas here. And some say that only on those four things exactly Chazal say. So the Mechaber comes out, he says, that even if some other, besides these four, you say Beres a gomel without saying Hashem's name. But the Mechaber brings that the minhag is that we say on all other things also. So some questions come up here. Let's say somebody was in a car and he nearly had an accident. Close call. So it's read from Moshe that if somebody was a close call, you don't bench gomel. Only if there was a crash. I guess even a crash, how big a crash, I guess, I don't know exactly, but Moshe says, some berechos a gomel, b'slachas, because thanking the chesed. So then there's also a famous child. Let's say you travel by plane. So many places can say only if you travel overseas. It's like because one of the four cases someone travel overseas. But Ramesh brings in his Dirshul Mishaburi brings that Ramesh said any flying is a sakana and he should bench gomel. So different opinions about a lot of these cases, he says. But if you, I just was wondering about this because if you say a close call, you don't bench gomel. Right? You see. So let's say these cases that he mentioned, Mechaber mentioned that a lion attacked him. Does it mean that he actually was on him already? Let's say the lion was there. He was there with a lion, and somehow someone came and shot the lion. Let's say the lion was about to attack him, and someone came and shot the lion. Does he have to bench gomel or not? And it's about a shor. According to this, why is it different than a close call? That a car almost hit him. So I don't know the answers. I'm just to bring up some questions. When
it's like a specs makeup because according to the one sheet that holds you don't have to make it only on these four cases, then then even so you don't have to do it for a lion. And even if it is a lion, maybe it's only the lion is on top of you. You know.
Yeah. All right. So Akapanim, just to think about Birsa Gam today, we have to thank the Monish Shalom for the tremendous chesed that we had, and there's also part of the chesed that we have a place to be. Now, it wasn't so simple. If you think about it, this yeshiva moved out after Pesach. They were here for years and years. So just mamish, they moved out.
Like the mirror in Shanghai. Yeah, they got there. The base measure is ready. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Does that mean had they not moved out, the fire wouldn't have happened?
I didn't go that far, but where would we be? I don't know.
It's the Ababack.
We might.
Back to the Future.
No, if they didn't move out, we'd have to be somewhere else. Wouldn't be here. Okay, just a little bit in the parsha one in Yonim here that they speak about. At the end of the parsha was a Maisa that Aaron and Miriam were speaking a bit of Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu, because Moshe Rabbeinu separated himself from his wife, and they overheard his wife saying something about this. So they spoke to each other, and it says that they said like this: Miriam Aaron Moshe. They spoke about Moshe, about the Isha Kushis that he took. And then they said, the president tell us exactly the story. It was about his wife. But Yoimu, and they said to each other, Harak Akba Moshe Dibra Hashem. Is Moshe Rabbeinu the only one that Hashem speaks to? Like Gambanu Dibra, we also Nevi'im, and we didn't do like this, So the Yishma Hashem heard what they were saying. In other words, that why is he doing this, separating himself from his wife? We also Nevi'im, we don't separate from our mates, whatever. So the pasuk says, next pasuk says, "Veish Moshe onav ma'od mikol adam ashal pnei adam." Here's what the Torah says about Moshe Rabbeinu, that he was onav ma'od, the biggest, most humblest person in the whole world. So what's the connection here? That they spoke Lashon Hara about Moshe Rabbeinu, and then it says he's the most humble person. So the Rambam says that the kavanah here is that it didn't bother him. He was the most humble person. Say whatever you want about him, he wouldn't care, he couldn't care less. So nevertheless, it was an aver of Lashon Hara. That's what the Torah is telling us here. That because it says that they both went out, and Hashem clarified it. Hashem right away spoke to Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron and Miriam. All three of you come to Oil Moed, the pasuk says, and they went there, and Hashem spoke, and he said, even though everyone else could also be a Navi, and Hashem speaks to them in their dreams, but not Moshe Rabbeinu. He's different than everyone. I speak to him directly, pel peh. So why weren't you afraid to speak about Moshe Rabbeinu? In other words, Hashem clarified it that he's a different level than them, and what he did was right for his level. That's what happened here. So it's an interesting thing here that the Torah says here that Moshe Rabbeinu was the most humble person in the world. But in a certain way, it sounds like they suspected him of a little bit of gaiva. They said, who does he think, he's doing things, we're also Nevi'im. What is he acting different than us? That's still saying, it's a little bit like they're choshenim for gaiva. And that's what maybe another pshat in the pasuk. That's why Hashem came to them directly and said, first thing, Ish Moshe onav ma'od. You guys, you don't start up with Moshe Rabbeinu and the gaiva. He's the onav ma'od mikol adam. But it makes you think, especially Aaron and Moshe and Miriam, they're the biggest tzaddikim, his brother and sister, and they didn't recognize this. They didn't understand that Moshe Rabbeinu is onav ma'od mikol adam. Makes us think about this a little bit. And you find also coming up by Kairach, that Kairach spoke also. He says Kairach had a taina, Kalu al Moshe al Aaron, gave Moshe and Aaron, and they said V'yemu aleim ravlechem. What are you taking all the honors here? Kikola eida kulam kedoshim. Everyone is holy. All the Jews are holy. V'sachem Hashem madua tisnasu. Why are you raising yourself, Kal Hashem? So here also seems Kairos coming with a taina, you're taking all the honors for yourself. Who do you think so they didn't recognize that Moshe Rabbeinu was the biggest honor, like they to come with such a taina against Moshe Rabbeinu. And you find one more time in by Dasan by Viram in the beginning of Shmuz, in the beginning, they said, Samcha, Mi Samcha, what's this, Harav Shayfet, the Lashon there, that when he came and he killed the Mitzri, who made you, who do you think you are, So it sort of gives you an idea that it's hard to really recognize who's the real Anav. Even Moshe Rabbeinu was the biggest Anav, but it's not like we picture the Anav, that Anav means, that everybody, you see him on there when they bend over and this, but Moshe Rabbeinu, from Aaron and Miriam, and even Kayach, even to get away with such a taina, you accuse Kayach, you accuse Moshe Rabbeinu. Let's say that if everyone see a Moshe Rabbeinu that he's the humblest person, it was like, was so obvious the way he acted, spoke, and this and what, how would he even have the chutzpah to try to make such an accusation that they're looking for cover, that they're looking for to be. It seems that what's really covered, what's really honored, is not so simple to recognize. We can be fooled. So Rabbi Kotler also speaks about this in this week's parasha. They took from the Shmuezzen, put on the parashas of the week. So he says, he asks it in a different way, nice, interesting way. He asks the kasha. He says that the pasuk says Moshe Rabbeinu was on of Ma'od, because she says something strange here. Moshe Rabbeinu taught everyone the Torah. So when he got to this pasuk, when he said Ish Moshe on a Ma'od, he's teaching them that he's the biggest Anav, and he said that. And he says that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't just teach the Pashup Pshat, he taught all the deep Pshatim in it. He said, so how could a humble person say that he's the humblest person? And then he says also, the famous Gemara at the end of Saita, it says that Mishimais Rebbe, when Rebbe was Nifta, it says that there were no more humble people after Rebbe. Rebbe was like a great humble person. So the Gemara says, so Rabbi Yosef said, no, I'm still around. Don't say there's no more humble people. I'm here still. So Rabbi says, that's the obvious question. Everybody asks, how could someone say, I'm the humble, I'm humble? It seems like hypocrisy. You're saying you're humble. Just off the record for a moment, I said once a pshat in this, different pshat we'll see in a second. That Vilna Goyen said a new pshat in this Gemara that Anna was the name of a Tana. He said when he said Rabbi Yosef said Ika Anna, there's Pashup pshat. Anna means me. Anna means like a noichi. But he's saying the Ika Anna, there is someone whose name is Anna. He's around, and it's a name. Instead of meaning me, it's a name of somebody. It was the name of a person. So they say that Reb Chaim Kanievsky had a kasha in this going because he couldn't find this name anywhere. In all, Reb Chaim Kanievsky could ask that kind of kasha that the only guy said there's somebody named Ivanoah. So Reb Chaim Kanievsky says there's nobody with that name. He found someone with a little similar name, but there's no one with that name. So I'm going to say a pshat like this. There's a little chassidus we'll see in a second. There's a ma'aser. They say that one of the Belzer Rebbes said a very interesting thing, that when they came out of Mitzrayim, then they got the Torah, and the Torah said, "We got it to a vincha." You have to tell about the Yetzias Mitzrayim to your children. So it came the first Pesach. Everyone had a problem because everyone came out of Mitzrayim. The kids also came out of Mitzrayim. They all experienced Yetzias Mitzrayim. So what am I going to tell my kid? What should I tell him? He might know more than me. The stories, I don't know, but what am I going to tell him? What should I say to him? They all lived through it. They all saw the whole thing. So what do you say? What don't you say? I didn't know, So the Belzer Rebbe said they had an Eitzah because Moshe Rabbeinu was the only one whose children were not there. We know that Moshe Rabbeinu's Gershon was the guy. They were midget. They were midget the whole time. They came. Eliezer and Gershon. They came to the Midbar, after the Yidden came out of Mitzrayim, Yisro brought them. So they said that they all said, let's go to Moshe Benu by the Seder, the first Seder, like we go to Rebbe by the Seder, and we'll listen to what Moshe Benu will say to his.
Why weren't they ever Sinai?
They came to us. Maybe they came. This question they came before Mount Torah, after Mount Torah, but they weren't in Mitzrayim. They didn't go through Yitzias Mitzrayim. So they'll go to Moshe Benu's Seder, and they'll hear how Moshe Benu will do Higarat Levincha, and then they'll know what you're supposed to say to your children. It's Chassidish, but it's Milson Mustafa. It makes sense, you know. They listen to it's not a. So okay. So that's what the Belzer Rebbe said. So I wanted to add, according to this Belzer Rebbe's thing, you can answer a famous kasha they have on the Haggadah, why Moshe Benu is not mentioned in the Haggadah. There's a big kasha. The whole Haggadah is about Yitzias Mitzrayim. You go try to find Moshe Benu's name. Maybe there's one pasuk has his name in there, but if you were telling me about Yitzias Mitzrayim, you'd say Moshe Benu went to Pari, Moshe Benu did this, Moshe Benu did this. With this thing. The whole story is Moshe Benu. Every other word would be Moshe Benu. And here, with the Haggadah Shel Pesach is about Yitzias Mitzrayim, Higarat Levincha, and he's not mentioned there. But now we could have an answer, because he didn't mention his name when he told his kids. He left himself out of the story. He was a Hanav. He left himself out of the story, so his name is not mentioned. Understand? That you can with the Belzer Rebbe's Torah, you could answer why this kasha, why Moshe Benu is not mentioned, because he's the one who wrote it. He's the one who we were, you know.
They didn't write that Haggadah.
How could they have wrote that
Haggadah is based on how Moshe Benu told over there. That's what it's saying. That's what he was saying. Yes.
How could I run the Haggadah? It mentions Ma'aseh B'nei Brak and different things.
Those additions. But the main things was whatever. The main things were whatever about Yitzias Mitzrayim Moshe Benu said.
Why weren't his children out of Sinai though? Yitzias Mitzrayim because they weren't born.
Could be they were by Har Sinai.
They were. Is it suffix? Is a reason?
It's a machlekes when they came before. There's a machlekes.
What's the inside?
In the Torah it's written they came before Mount Torah. Yisro came. That's so it sounds. But
why wouldn't they have been there?
Depends when Yisro came. It's a fact. The question when he came. They were in Midjan. They were born in Midjan. When Moshe Benu had run away from Mitzrayim, he was born there, and then later Yisro brought his children back to meet him in the Midbar. There's a question. It's like historically when were they
traveled with Klal Yisrael to Har Sinai?
They didn't travel to Har Sinai. They met him there. That's the question. Okay, so with this also maybe you could answer the kasha that Chaim Kanievsky asked on the Vilna Gaon. He says Vilna Gaon said there's an Anav by the name of Anor. So Chaim Kanievsky says I don't see his name anywhere. That's the whole point. He's a Tana, but you can't find his name. Whenever he said, I heard from this one, I heard from that one. If someone said like this, he was such an Anav that you can't find his name. It's not a kasha why he's not. There was a person by that name, that's what we're going to say. And I don't find him. You see, that's an Anav. You can't find his name. That's the whole point. You can't. There's such a person, but you're not going to find his name. That's getting off a little bit. But this Rabbi Kotler asked that if he's an Anav, how could he teach the Torah that says he's an Anav? How could the Pashup shop back to the Pashup thing? What Rabbi Geisa said, don't say there's no more humble people. I'm still around. He said, how is it possible? It sounds strange. So he says, obviously we don't understand what real humility is. That's the whole point. And that's why they couldn't tell him Moshe Benu could talk about it. Yes, could talk about it. So basically, from what I understand, he says here, is that the point is, do you take the credit for yourself, or you don't take the credit for yourself? That's what he basically says. That a person could have milas. He could be whatever mile he has. He's a chacham. He's a gibor. He's a usher. And he could say, I'm a chacham because I learned stark and I'm smart or he could say, the Hashem helped me. It's a gift that I am able to learn, and Hashem gave me the cheshik to learn. Who gets the credit? That's what it boils down to. It simply says that. It says, let me read a little bit of the lesson. He says. He says, but first he said what it says. Guy v'lohab. It's anavu behebuk shedei or maker. The point is, an Anav recognizes the Lesle Migarmei Klum. Nothing is his credit. Hakol Chesed v'Taiva. Everything is a Chesed and a Taiva. Hamaylis, a Chachma. if he has takadis milas, hakol chesed and a dover. And he himself is not fulfilling what he's supposed to be doing. He's not doing enough, he says. And he brings a passing in Divrei Yomim that David HaMelech gathered all the gold and silver to build the base of Mikdash. And he says, in my poverty, I prepared for the base of Shem, Zov, Kikar Meir, 100,000 Kikar Zov, and the silver how much, and the Chaysh. But he started off by saying, in my poverty, I prepared this, he said. So David was margish that all the treasures that he had is ba'ani, because it's not his. He's poor. He doesn't have, it's not his, he says. It's all from Hashem. It's not, he didn't feel that it's his money, sort of. So even though it wasn't money, even. And he says, but Gaiva, it's the opposite. He says that a person takes like Kaichid Yosim Yodi, that he takes the credit for himself. So I saw also a similar line in the Sefer Marpe Loshen. It's a Musa Sefer that Rabbi Fall Hamburger, he was a very big guy in time, like around the time of the Gain, he lived. And he wrote a sefer a little about Lashon Hara, but he speaks about, there's a whole Amud HaNova. So he says, one of the things he says here, I'll see how much time I have, but he says about a rich person, he says, has to be very careful that if he's wealthy, not to become a Balgaiva. Adarab, he says, the opposite, he should humble himself. That whatever he has, his wealth is a gift from Hashem. Like we say in davening, in Vayvar David, wealth and honor is from Hashem. And he says, not only that, because he's wealthy, he's more obligated to do avodas Hashem, to thank Hashem for the taiva, he said. And perhaps that should humble him. Maybe I'm doing enough. For all that Hashem blessed me with, I'm not doing enough, he's saying. So he says, and he goes through how a rich person is supposed to be, should be thinking, he says. He says he should be mentioning the taiva Hashem. He should always be talking about what Hashem did for him. And he should be praising Hashem. And he says he shouldn't look down at other people that don't have, because it's not his credit, he said. And he says, let's say someone helped him. Someone gave him an opportunity, and that's how he became wealthy. He shouldn't forget about Hashem. He shouldn't start saying, that person made me rich, and so on. He says, you should thank the person, but he says, don't forget about Hashem. And don't think that you can't lose this money, he's saying. So I invite the things that he says. And he says like this, a very strong thing in this same shtickle here. He says, whoever has more blessings from Hashem has to serve Hashem more. And he says, anyone that Hashem gave b'toiva, something good that other people don't have. Let's say wealth. Let's say someone is blessed with wealth. Not everybody has wealth, right? So, Sorov shechayev es atzma, he has to try to take on himself avoida sheyishachid ba mibaladehim. He has to try to think of something that he could do, just like Hashem gave him something other people don't have. He has to do something that avodas Hashem that other people don't have to do. He should try to compensate. Hashem gave him a blessing. He should try to give back to Hashem something that he could do more. So he's saying these things should humble a person. And that's the sign of Oisher, that a person takes the credit himself and he forgets about Hashem. That's the test of a rich person, not to forget about Hashem. The other, he's supposed to thank Hashem more. So he says, that he brings a Gemara in Saita that says there that talks about, in the beginning of Saita, a lot about Gaiva, and that Gemara says, one of the things that says, Chizkiah says, if you want your davening to be listened to, you have to be humble. He says, Ain't Chulasei Shal Adam Nishmas, when we daven to Hashem, Hashem doesn't listen. Elam Kei Mesim Atzmei Kabasar, like a piece of meat. He says, the pasuk says, Shneimar, the Gemara says, Vayim Dei Chodesh B'Chodshay, Yim Dei Shabbos B'Shabbato, every month, every Shabbos, Yovei Kol Basar, L'Shtach Voice L'Fnei Hashem, L'Fonei Omer Hashem. So he says, Pirish Rashi, L'Shtach Voice L'Spal, Oisem Shem Kabasar Yivay V'Spalu. I don't know if that's Lashon Rashi already, but you say if a person is humble, then Hashem will listen to his tefillas. So he says, he brings this thing that I mentioned at the very beginning, that how was it that Korach was Choshed Moshe Rabbeinu for Gaiva? He says, that we mentioned in the beginning. So he says that when they say Madu this Nasu Akal Hashem, Mizen Nira Shekorach V'Sayatu Korach in his group Chashdu L'Moshe Shu Misnase Alam Hashem, that he's trying to be a leader of a Neitel Sra Gdul Atzmei L'Achiv, and so on. So he says, that's what the pasuk says afterwards. Vayishma Moshe v'yipol aponav. The pasuk says when Moshe heard this accusation, he fell on the floor. He fell on aponav. So he says what Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to say. He says here, Paul Hamburger, Harem is bezeh. Harry wanted to show she'ein by midazu. He wanted to show that he's not a Baal Gaiva. And he says an interesting way of showing that. He says because it says, he brings a Chazal in Megillah, that Adam Choshev should not fall on his face in davening unless he's certain he will be answered. No, that's what the Gemara says. So Moshe Rabbeinu fell on his face to show that he's sure Hashem will answer him. Why is he sure? Because he doesn't have Gaiva. Because Hashem listens to a person that doesn't have Gaiva. That's what he said. That's how he learns Pshat, what Moshe Rabbeinu did over here. Then he said also an interesting thing, that we know it says that Ezel Chacham, Pirkei Avos says, Halemin Mikol Adam. Someone that's willing to learn from anybody. So he says, he wants to say a new pshat in that. What does it mean when we call them? That a person sometimes feels, I don't have to go to that person to learn. I know more than him, or what am I going to get from him, so on. So he says, Ezel Chacham, let me call it, means that he has the midah of anova. Ezel Chacham, that he's willing to learn Mikol Adam. So he says interesting thing that Mar says somewhere that by Torah is different than other things. If you have let's say take a pot. If it's empty, you can fill it up. If it's full, you can't put anything into it. But he says by Torah is the opposite. The more a person has, the more you can put in. So a person is a chacham, he could get more. He can get from everybody. He can get things. And he says, I'll end with this part. He says that it says. It brings another Gemara in Eruvin. If a person makes himself like a midbar, it's everyone can step on him. He's humble. Torah nitlev matana. He gets Torah as a gift. It says. So he wants to learn pshat like this. Nice to Paul Hamburg. He says that. What does it mean he gets Torah as a gift? So it says that if let's say a Rav is Merchel on his covet, a king can't be Merchel on his covet. A Rebbe could be Merchel on his covet. You can say it's okay. You can do this, whatever might be the case, because the Torah is his. It says Rav Shemachel Kvoidei Machel, because the Torah is his. The Torah Yega Yema B'Layla, Torah Say, it's his Torah. So he says that's what it means over here. The Rebbe he says if a person is humble, then he gets the Torah as a matana. Why? Because if it's a matana, then it's his, and then he could be Michael on his cover. So the humble person, he says, the Torah gives him a matana, so that he could be humble and be Michael on his cover. But it says, but a person that's not going to be Michael on his cover, he doesn't need this matana, because he's not going to be Michael on his cover. So then he doesn't get a matana. That's what he says. Okay, so this day we'll talk a little bit about the Indian of another, whatever. Right. Yeah.
What's it? You have to believe it also. Yeah. You have to believe